Welcome and thanks for joining as we are taking a look at the book of Daniel. Last week we started in chapter 1, and this week we're continuing in chapter 2 and 3, and we're going to take a look at what was going on in the lives of these men that were exiled and brought away from their homeland in Judah and Israel and brought into the land of Babylonians, and Nebuchadnezzar was the king and his reign. And wow, can you imagine how difficult that would be? Completely different culture, completely different than what you have experienced. And you were put in a position to learn and excel while not compromising your faith. And I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. And yet they excelled because of their faith in God. And God provided and took care of them every step of the way. As we looked last week is when they were challenged with eating food that would have defiled them and made them unclean. They remained true and did not eat that food, and God took care of them, and they excelled. And this week we're going to continue taking a look. A couple weeks ago we took a look at King Nebuchadnezzar's dream and talked about how Daniel had wisdom, and he understood and knew what the dream meant, and he gave all the praise and glory and honor to God. And he showed wisdom because he understood where wisdom came from. He took a look and said, hey, I can't interpret these things. Nobody on this earth can. But God of the universe, God who knows all mysteries, can tell you what your dream means. And he interpreted it. And he told King Nebuchadnezzar what it meant and everything that was going on. So today we're going to take a look at that dream just a little bit, and then we're going to move into chapter 3 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and what happens in that chapter. So just encourage you, get out, enjoy this beautiful weather that we're having here in Wisconsin. And it's good for you. Go for a walk, go for a hike, go fishing, do something in order to enjoy this weather as long as you're being safe. But enjoy the weather while we have it. Spring is a beautiful time in Wisconsin. So as things are chaotic and things are changing and we don't know exactly what next week is going to be like, I should encourage you to do what we can. Don't be discouraged, but have faith and understand that God is here for us. And he will provide and take care of us. And we don't have to fret, worry, because God is loving, caring, kind, compassionate. He knows where we're at and what's going on. And he will provide as long as we remain faithful to him. And that was a challenge we had last week, is to be faithful and to show our faith in some way. And I just encourage you to continue to do that. As we look through the book of Daniel, is just an immense amount of faith that we see as we look through it. Chapter 2, we have Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar and their interaction as Daniel is interpreting the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. And Daniel showed great wisdom as he told King Nebuchadnezzar what was going on and what was going to happen. And he said it's not anything he did, but it's through God. He gave all glory, knowing that wisdom comes from God, understanding the mysteries and things that are going on come from God. And this week I encourage you to know that as a fact, that all of the chaos, all of the mystery isn't a surprise to God. He knows, and he wants us to turn to him. So during these times, just focus on your relationship with him. Do what it takes to grow closer to him, and he will be faithful. He is true, and you can count on him to be there for you. Well, let's pray, and then we'll continue with the story of Daniel. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your great love. We thank you for your mercies that are new every day. We thank you for the way you provide, take care of us, and that you love us so much. We ask that you would help us to be faithful, and we are so thankful that you are faithful and your promises are true, and that you want us to lean on you during uncertain times. We thank you for the example of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and their desire to follow after you and their faithfulness. Help us to be people of faith like that. In your name we pray. Amen. Faith is such a hard concept to grasp, because faith is doing things, believing things, even though you may not see it, trusting and knowing in something that you may not see or quite understand. And I imagine that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were going through the same sort of things in the upheaval, the chaos, and the things of their world being turned totally upside down, thrown into a foreign culture, and then expected to excel and exceed in everything that they were doing. And their faith remained solid during their times and their trials, in every part of it. They remained faithful. And I just want us to be a people of that kind of faith. No matter what obstacles are put in front of us, I want us to be a people of faith that can jump over those obstacles and know it's that God is the one lifting us over and carrying us on as we have faith and understanding in who He is in His faithfulness. And this week, chapter 2, we have Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago and how Daniel's faith and wisdom really showed through. And he told Nebuchadnezzar about the dream and what it meant. And I think it's interesting. Here's King Nebuchadnezzar, completely freaked out, doesn't know what's going on. And in in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 4, not in verse 4, it talks about 4 parts of the statue, and it represented 4 different kingdoms. And the head of gold represented King Nebuchadnezzar and his great kingdom and his power, and that he was in control of everything. And then subsequent kingdoms that would come after him, varying levels of success. And then there was a rock that was cut from a mountain, and that rock smashed this statue, and that kingdom lived on forever. And so Daniel's telling King Nebuchadnezzar what this dream means, and he praises God, and he says, wow, thank you that you, Daniel, were able to reveal this thing through God. Your God is the God of all mysteries. He is greatest God of all, and we should worship Him. And it was short-lived, as you would hope and you would expect that something so great, some mystery being revealed, that King Nebuchadnezzar would turn to God and he would turn his life for Him and live for Him. But as we go on, it does not last at all. And in chapter 3, in verse 1, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officers officials to come to dedicate to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So here is King Nebuchadnezzar, just has his dream interpreted. He is in awe of how God revealed this mystery to him, and in response, he responds with arrogance. And he thinks, wow, I am a great king. My kingdom is going to be great. He neglected the part about the godly kingdom that's going to come and reign forever and destroy all other kingdoms. He was focused on his own greatness and his own kingdom. And what does he do? He builds a statue. Not just any statue, a statue 90 feet high. And he demands that everybody worship this statue. And in his arrogance, he turns from God. In verse 4, chapter 3, it says, Then a herald shouted out, People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. King Nebuchadnezzar, in his pride and arrogance, sets up the statue and demands everybody to worship it. And at the sound, everybody was to bow down and to worship him. But in verse 8, it says, Some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to the said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king! You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up." Conflict. Here, King Nebuchadnezzar sets up the statue. Worship me. That goes against everything that God has set up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are ruling in Babylon, and they refuse to worship the gods of Babylon. They refuse to worship the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had put in place. Well, the outcome would be, the punishment for not bowing down to the statue was to be thrown into a furnace. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, being tested with their faith, stood true again. They refused. They would not bow down. So the others ratted them out, told on them, went to the king and said that they aren't bowing down, so their punishment must be, they must be thrown into the fire. In verse 13, it continues on what happens. It says, Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I've set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power." So here he challenges them, says, I'm giving you one more chance. If you bow down, you'll be saved. If you don't, you're going into a furnace, and you're not going to survive my power. I want you to catch that. Here Nebuchadnezzar's pride and arrogance is saying, I am most powerful here, and you are not going to survive. You're not going to survive. No gods can stand up to me. And so here he is telling them they're not worshiping the gods. He's not bowing down to the statue, and he is, in essence, considering himself a god. And he is demanding that they bow down. He goes, you have one more chance, and if you don't, you're going into this furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." So here they refuse. Not only do they refuse, they challenge King Nebuchadnezzar and say, your power can't stop us from serving God, and we will not serve these false gods, and we will not worship you in your statue. So here, with this moment where they are tested, their faith, their whole life is put on the line. If they don't worship and bow down, they're going to be thrown into a furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar gives them one more chance and says, hey, if you just bow down, all's good. If not, you're going into the furnace, because no one can escape my power. And their reply says, hey, your power isn't bigger than our God. Our God will protect us. But even if we do go in the furnace and die, God is our God, and we will serve him only. In verse 19, it says, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He got so angry. He got so filled with rage that his face just got all distorted. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. So these furnaces were made to make bricks. So it was to bake the earth and to turn them into solid bricks. So they were hot as it is. So he ordered that they be turned up hotter, 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. This furnace was so hot, and they were tied up, they were bound, they were thrown in, and as they were thrown in, it was so hot that the guards who threw them in died instantly, and they fell into the fire. They stood up to the challenges of faith. With death looming in their face, they did not waver in their faith. They knew that God would provide and take care of them, no matter the circumstances, no matter what's going on. They said it would even be better for us to die if we have to than to give up our faith and trust in something other than the God we serve. And man, I want that to be our kind of faith. I want us in this area, Mount Pisgah and surrounding area, to be known for our faith like that. Our faith that will stand up through adversity in times where even if death is looming in our faces and staring us down, that we would not compromise our faith, but turn to God and know that He is faithful and true. In verse 24, suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out! Come here!" They go into the fire, and they are not harmed. King Nebuchadnezzar looks in to see what's going on, and he realized there is 4 people in the furnace, and he questions in amazement, "Didn't we send 3? I see 4, and one of them looks like a god." God himself came with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He protected them, kept them safe from the flames, and King Nebuchadnezzar was amazed by the power, once again, of God. So here we have contrasting power. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was the most powerful and his kingdom was great, and he was going to put an end to to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and challenge God, Yahweh, God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And God wins. God protects them, keeps them safe, and Nebuchadnezzar is amazed. And then he calls for them to come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Can you imagine what that would have been like? They come out of the furnace. They come out of the burning hot, 7 times hotter furnace, and they're not harmed. Not only are they not harmed, not a hair on their head was damaged or anything. The fire didn't touch them. They didn't even smell like smoke. Can you imagine that? God's protection is so much greater that not a hair, not even a smell of the fire touched them. And God's saying, Nebuchadnezzar, I am the most powerful. I am greater than you in your fire. Whatever you have planned isn't as great as I am. And my protection for my people is true, and I am faithful. And so as they come out, everyone around them is amazed. In verse 28, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Amazing miracle as God looked after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and because of their faith, they were set free. Their faith pulled them from the depths of the fire, and their faith in God and his ability to rescue them, God provided and took care of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. How do you respond when you're faced with times, situations that question your faith? Do you stand up? Do you give in? Do you compromise? Do you wonder if it's worth it or what's going on? So many times, I think, when we are faced with times that challenge our faith, we back down. We stay quiet. We don't do things to give glory and honor to God. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood up to God, stood up to Nebuchadnezzar, not in an offensive way or one that was disrespectful in any way, but they said, we will not serve any other God but our God. We will not bow down to your statue or serve your gods. In times where it's chaos and we're not understanding what is coming or how things are going to play out, we need to know that God is the God of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And we need to be steadfast in him. We need to put our faith in him. When we stand times of difficulty, when we're being tested in our faith, we need to stand firm in him, because it's not going to get any better. As things continue on and humanity continues to get worse and further away from God, those of us who are followers of Christ are going to be tested. There'll be times where we're going to be called out on our faith, and we need to be ready to know if we're going to stand up for him or if we're going to ease away. And I think it's important for us to realize that Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, when they were faced in the beginning, they didn't compromise. They could have taken the food from the king, but they didn't defile God. And then as things amped up and things got even more serious, they didn't waver. Their faith was solid, and God provided. God took care of them. And they said, even if we have to die, we're not going to serve God other than our God, the true God of all times. And we are called to stay strong and steadfast in our faith. In 1 Corinthians 15:58, it says, "So, my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless." Here he is talking about our heavenly resurrected bodies, and that no matter what we have to go to, we should work enthusiastically and stay steadfast in our faith, because it's worth it. Our eternal lives, our eternal bodies are much better than anything that we have to offer or have going on here in earth. And so God is saying, hey, trust in me and know that the plan I have is far better. It's far better to live for eternity and to be steadfast and not to give into temptation and to follow after things that are not ungodly. It says, be strong and immovable. Our faith needs to be strong and immovable. When we face questions and things that challenge our faith, we need to know and have a focus that not here and now, but of eternity. In Psalm 33:18, it says, "But the Lord watches over those who fear him, those who rely on his unfailing love. He rescues them from death and keeps them alive in times of famine. We put our hope in the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. Let your unfailing love surround us, Lord, for our hope is you alone. We're not to rely on our own strength and our own abilities or the things that we think are our power, like King Nebuchadnezzar saying, hey, my power is greater. My furnace is going to take care of these troublemakers. God's power is greater, and he rescues his people. Our faith is to be put in God and to know that he rescues his people. He brings comfort to those who need comforting. He mourns with those that are mourning, and he gives joy to those who are steadfast. And he showers his love on us. And he is faithful. And we're not to rely on our own strength and our own abilities. When times come where we are tested in our faith, it's easy to say, well, I can do this, or I can come out on top of this if I just work harder or do more. There comes a point where we need to let go and let God work. And we need to stand up for our faith. I think it's amazing that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, when they approached the king, they were true, they were honest, and they didn't back down, but they weren't rude, they weren't arrogant, they just trusted and knew that God would provide, and they said what needed to be said. They did what needed to be done, and they didn't compromise. And starting with the food that they didn't participate in, and they trusted that God would give them health, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego having faith that God would protect them, and even if they had to die, it was worth far more than giving in and worshiping something that wasn't true and wouldn't last for eternity. Our faith is tested each and every day. We're tempted in a lot of different things, and I think a lot of times with this, times we're in alone and different things, temptation is strong, and we can give into that temptation. Our faith is constantly being tried, and I want us to be a people of faith, to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and saying, I don't care what has to happen, but I'm not giving in. I'm going to turn to God and let him be my fortress. I'm going to cling to him in his unfailing love, in his amazing love that he has for us. And that's my prayer, and that's my hope, is that we stand up in times where our faith is tested, and it's going to continue. Our faith is going to be tested more and more as things continue on, and it's just the reality of how things are. The further humanity gets away from God, the more our faith is going to be tested. And the question is, are we going to stand up? Do we have the faith it takes to stand up when our faith is being called out? Do we have enough faith now when we're being tested in what maybe just small things? It's practicing ground. Like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were tested in smaller things, and they stood true, and God proved himself. God has proved himself to us many times. You can look back in your lives and think of all the times where God has seen you through difficult times or difficult situations, and he has brought you out of dark times, and he's still the same God, and he wants you to cling to him during these times, and he is going to get us through it. It's his power and his love that we can cling to and know that he is faithful and he is true and his word will last forever. I want us to be a people of amazing faith, knowing that God is by our side and we can lean on him during uncertain times and know that he will give us wisdom and understanding, and we need to stand in our faith in him. This week, my challenge is to not give in to temptation. Don't do things that compromise our faith. And when we're tested, stand true. And how can we do that? Whenever tempted, pray. Talk to God. Say, hey, I'm being tempted and I do not want to turn from you. Do things that help you stay away from those temptations. Don't do things where you're isolated or out of people that care and love you and want you to have a right relationship with God. And if temptation is knocking at the door. It says to throw off all things that are trying to weigh you down so that you can live a life that is pleasing and honoring to God. The sin that so easily ensnares you, it says to get rid of it. And you are going to live a life of faith. And I pray that that is what we can do. Let's pray as we close. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your great love and your mercies. Help us to be a people of faith, a people of understanding during these times. Help us to stand up to these tests of our faith. And we just love you and praise you in your name. Amen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.